Good afternoon. I wanted to give you some updates for the Chapter 2 lecture outline. One of the things people tend to ask me is, how do I eat healthy? And I always find that a difficult question to answer. But in a very generic sense, consuming a variety of foods that are balanced and having a moderate intake of each of those foods is really kind of a philosophy that I go by. And what I mean by this is that a variety is different foods. For example, if you ate a lot of apples and pears, that's great for fiber, but they don't have a lot of vitamin C. So even though you may be meeting the requirements for fruit, you are not getting one of the nutrients that you need. So choosing a wide variety of foods is important. And then try not to overeat any single type of food. And I think of the fad diets when I think of this. They tend to emphasize one food in large amounts. I think the paleo diet is way too heavy in animal foods and not sufficient in plant-based foods. And then moderation is really looking at controlling portion size. And I kind of think about this in frequency and amount. So for example, I really enjoy French fries, but I don't eat them all the time. But when I do eat them, I eat a fairly decent portion. So it's not something that I have every day. But maybe people that enjoy chocolate have a little bit of chocolate every day, so they actually have a small portion because they're having it more frequently. I'm going to skip through nutrient density, but this just shows you a great example of, I think, one of the problems with our diet is that here's an example of two foods that are both beverages, and clearly you look at the calories of the soda is much higher than the calories of the milk, but the nutrients are so much higher in the milk. So when you look at something like this, we talk about nutrient density. Milk is very nutrient dense. Plant foods tend to be very nutrient dense. Energy density looks at the number of calories in a serving. So high energy dense foods are high calorie foods. So when we talk about nutrition, we kind of want to know how healthy is somebody. And we don't want somebody to be undernourished, which is an example of undernutrition. But what we see really in this country is more overnutrition. And we see this in the form of obesity. We are consuming more calories typically than our body needs. And one of the problems is that in the short term, there's very little symptoms. You don't walk into McDonald's and overeat and then walk out and have a heart attack. It's little changes that you do all the time that really make a big difference. If you go to McDonald's every day and eat McDonald's every day, that's going to be detrimental over time versus if you chose to eat apples and almonds as a snack instead of chips, again, that's over time going to provide a lot of benefits. So when we look at deciding how to measure how healthy somebody is, there's a four-part system to that. And one of them is anthropometric, and this is probably the most widely used, and this is height and weight. How much does somebody weigh for their height? And yes, there's differences in body fat and muscle mass, but in general, it's a very easy screening tool, and we actually use what's called the body mass index, and we'll learn more about that in Chapter 7. Another way we can really assess nutritional status is looking at some biochemical markers. What is their glucose, their blood sugar? What is their protein levels in their blood? What is their cholesterol? Those are examples of biochemical assessments. Clinical is just looking at the person. When I used to work in the hospital, one of the ways that we really diagnosed malnutrition was both by some biochemical data as well as their height and weight. But when we looked at a person, did they have a good color of skin? Was their hair shiny? Was their eyes sunken or not? Those were all clinical measures. And then dietary, we're going to talk about some different ways that we're going to assess diet. One of the examples that you guys have this week is the Chapter 2 class activity, if you choose to complete that. What you're going to do in that is enter in what you ate for a day and compare that to maybe what the guidelines for your height, weight, and activity level. And then environmental, this just looks at some environmental causes of health, safe water, things like that. One of the problems with nutritional assessments is that there are some limitations, and I mentioned this before, is that there's a long time before when you actually eat poorly until when you develop the signs and symptoms of that. And symptoms can be due to other causes. You can get cancer because you ate a lot of fat and very few fruits and vegetables, or you can get cancer because you have a genetic trait to that. So we really don't know. So what should we do? Well, to consume a healthy diet, what I really emphasize as a healthy diet is focusing on eating a plant-based diet. Now, that doesn't mean that you should never eat meat. I'm not a vegetarian. I eat plenty of chicken and fish and steak and all types of meat. But when I look at my plate, it's like the picture of my plate, more than half of my plate is fruits and vegetables with a small amount of either grains and then a small protein. Drink alcohol in moderation. Control your weight. That has to do with activity. There's the exercise. Don't smoke. I'm going to skip through the scientific method and the studies. There are no questions on the Chapter 2 quiz about that. So the dietary reference intakes are ways that we can look at how healthy an individual or a group of individuals are in comparison to a certain nutrient. So they are kind of broken into numerous categories, and the RDAs, the recommended dietary allowances, and the AIs, the adequate intakes, those are set for vitamins and minerals. The estimated energy requirement, the EER, that's based on a calculation of how many calories you should eat for your height, weight, age, and your activity level. The upper limits give you an idea of what not to exceed for vitamins and minerals. For example, if you were considering a supplement, you would want to maybe look, for example, vitamin C, the upper limit is 2,000 milligrams. If you take more than 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C, that's likely to result in some gastrointestinal distress. And then daily values are used only on the food labels. Here's a review of those standards. Again, the recommended dietary allowances are set. They're a set of guidelines for vitamins and minerals that meet the needs of almost all healthy people. So it's a way that we can look at, do most people get enough vitamin C to avoid getting a disease? Keep in mind that these are most of the time the minimum amount somebody needs. Like I said, vitamin C, the DRI for most people is around between 75 and 90 milligrams of vitamin C a day. That's easily met by one orange. We know that you won't get the disease scurvy if you have at least that much in your diet, but you can go up to 2,000 milligrams without having any negative side effects. So that the DRI, keep in mind, that's the minimum amount that you need in a day. The dietary guidelines are another set of rules that kind of look at how to plan menus. How do you choose what you're choosing to eat? And they're pretty generic. One of the things that we look at in this country is that we're eating too many calories. It's estimated that Americans eat between about 500 and 1,000 calories too much a day. Now, considering that it only takes about 3,500 calories to gain a pound, that's a lot of extra calories that we're eating, which is resulting in that pretty significant weight gain. There are certain foods that we want people to eat more of and certain foods that we want people to eat less of. And there are definitely some nutrients that need to be increased. And these healthy eating patterns have to do with the very visual my plate, half of the plate being fruits and vegetables. So this gives you an idea of calories. What are kind of the generic calorie needs for most people, and what does that relate to when it comes to types of foods? Fruits, vegetables, grains. It kind of shows you if you're going to eat 1,600 calories, you really need about 1.5 cups of fruits, 2 cups of vegetables, 5 ounces of whole grains, 5 ounces of protein, and 3 cups of dairy. I don't know that I always agree with these food intake patterns. These are set by the government. I think they tend to be a little heavy on the dairy and a little heavy on the grains, and probably not sufficient in the fruits and vegetables. What I really tell people is there's really no limit on the fruits and vegetables. I mean, maybe fruits, especially if you're consuming it as juice, but vegetables have so little calories, it's very hard to overeat vegetables. Keep in mind that potatoes, corn, and peas are actually considered grains in the starchy grain, and dried peas like legumes, pinto beans, etc., are considered a protein food. Dairy includes milk, cheese, and yogurt. And I'm not a big fan of people getting most of their dairy from cheese. I personally think that 2 servings of dairy in the form of yogurt and milk, or yogurt and dark green leafy vegetables, is more than sufficient. So this kind of shows you the My Plate, and this is the assignment that you have if you choose to do it this week. What they really try to focus on eating more of: whole grains, fruits, vegetables. Dairy, I'm not as concerned about if people are getting at least 2 servings. Seafood, plant oils, fiber, potassium, vitamin D, calcium, and eat less of calories from saturated fats and sugars. Solid fats and sugars, which are saturated fats. Refined grains, white, anything white, salt, and animal fats. Americans eat really too much animal fats, and you can see from here we're getting way too much of the things that we shouldn't be getting and not enough of things we should. So the My Plate replaces the My Pyramid, and it's that concept of fruits and vegetables half the plate, grains about a quarter, and those should be whole grains, and the remaining space is reserved for protein. I really try to push people to have lean proteins like chicken and turkey, or fish, or plant-based proteins like legumes and nuts. And dairy is also on there. There's some debate about how much dairy people need each day. Calcium is important, but there's lots of different ways we can get it in our diet. This talks a little bit about portions. Let's skip through a few of these. The food for thought this week was the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, and I actually really like to focus on that one more than the government's healthy eating plate. I think it focuses more on the concept of whole grains. It focuses on the fruits, the healthy sources of fat like plant oils and nuts, as well as the consumption of fish and moderate intake of alcohol, and not so much on the dairy. The food labeling, I want you to understand that the daily values are used on those instead of the DRIs. And basically the food labels are set to these standards, which is kind of ironic because most women probably don't eat 2,000 calories. This shows you some of the things that are found on the food label. I'm a little bit running out of time. I only have 15 minutes to post this discussion. So what I'm interested in having you know is be familiar with what is found on the food label. Pick up a food label and see what kind of things you see on it, and email me some questions if you have questions on food labels. These talk about some of the claims that are allowed to be made on food labels with certain nutrients, and there's some very definitive comparative and absolute claims like on sodium and fat. And these can be found in your book. There's a table in your book. So last thing I want to talk about is what is some of the worst nutrition advice I see out there. The first is the quick fix. I'm not into cleansing. Your body does its own natural cleansing. Those cleansing diets are not necessary, can actually be harmful. If you're trying to lose weight or trying to make better eating habits, it's much better to do a slow process than a quick fix. Anytime they show warnings of danger, that's probably not a good thing. Things that sound too good be true. Simplistic conclusions like eat only 1 or 2 foods. Recommendations based on a single study, dramatic statements. For example, the paleo diet. I know a few of you follow that. I'm not an advocate of the paleo diet. I think it's too heavy on animal proteins. And their thoughts of, well, this is how cavemen lived. My 2 thoughts around that are, if you are hunting for your own meat, then you can eat as much meat as you want, which we don't. And secondly, these are people that died in their 30s and 40s, so they didn't live long enough to get heart disease. So keep in mind, some of this poor nutrition advice really can be really more popular in the media, so be careful with the types of things that you do read in the media. One of the things that I try to explain to people is if your information is coming from any source that is not .org or .edu, it's probably trying to sell something. I'm going to end now. The dietary supplements, I'm going to actually cover a little bit more in chapter 11, I believe, so there are no questions on the quiz about the dietary supplements either. All right, I hope that was helpful. Thanks. Have a good afternoon.